Chapter 10. You really must allow me to see my wife, Pansy. If you do not remove yourself from the doorway, I shall be forced to move you myself. I know you think you are protecting your mistress, but I think I am in a better position to do that than you are. Elizabeth had dozed off and struggled to conscious wakefulness when she heard the commotion at the door. She called out to her maid. Pansy, I think it's all right. You can let him in. Pansy stood back, allowed the Earl to enter, and then quickly shut the door behind him before hurrying over to stand watchfully at her mistress's side. Elizabeth was gratified to see her husband's calm acceptance of the maid's protective stance. Good afternoon, my dear lady. The Earl began with a beguiling smile, while his eyes seemed to devour her with their intensity. You look well. Elizabeth tried to sit up and winced as her arm pinched at her. The Earl quickly assisted her. Your deceit is appreciated, my lord, she replied with a smile. I am not lying to you, my dear. The last time I saw you, you looked truly awful. I was really afraid for you, which is why I have barged in here like this. I couldn't stand the suspense any longer and had to know for myself that you were on the mend, as the doctor had promised. How are you, really, from your own perspective? Heartily sick of being in this room, she began, but vastly improved. The doctor told me that possibly he might allow me to leave the room tomorrow, but I have decided that whatever he says, I am getting up and dressing on the morrow. I shall go quite mad if I must remain confined for one more day. Do you think that is wise, my dear? One clear advantage to your remaining in your room is that you are sure to be kept safe. I refuse to be such a coward that I must hide in my bedchamber for the rest of my life. I understand that there is a very real threat against me, although I do not know why, but I refuse to allow it to win. I will not be kept a prisoner. She tried not to glare at him, but wasn't sure if she had completely managed to quell her ire. Of course not, my dear lady. No one spoke of keeping you a prisoner. But what do you know about a threat against you? His concerned gaze had sharpened to alert watchfulness. Elizabeth's gaze darted to Pansy. She had her hand wrapped around the wash-basin. It wasn't the best weapon, but Elizabeth was relieved to feel somewhat protected should the Earl turn out to be a threat. She bemoaned once more her weak position confined in the bed. She had thought to tell him everything, but in that moment she changed her mind. Even though the Countess was clearly afraid of Broderick, and it was obvious that bounder bore a burden of guilt in the situation, Elizabeth had not yet proven that the Earl was not involved in his wife's death, and, therefore, she could not be certain that he was not somehow involved in the attack on her. She diverted his suspicion with a smile. I know nothing about it because I am stuck in this room. All I know is that I was shot at by someone riding a brown horse. The most nondescript description ever stated on this earth, I am sure. But I trust you are investigating the situation, are you not, my lord? Have you found out anything that can be of use? Perhaps we could discuss it. I strongly doubt an attack on me stems from anything to do with my history, but it surely wouldn't hurt to share ideas. She could feel his gaze soften as he considered her words. Considering how very involved with this that you are, I can see how you would consider it only fair that I at least keep you informed. That is exactly right, my lord. Elizabeth could feel her smile of approval stretching her face as she beamed at him. He returned her smile before settling himself gingerly on the edge of her bed. I hope I don't jar your arm by sitting with you. Elizabeth felt a flush cover her from head to toe. She hoped it wasn't a fever coming on. She rather suspected it might be the handsome Earl's presence in her room, with her only dressed in her nightgown. She appreciated that he was very careful not to touch her, for fear of hurting her wound, but she felt so very aware of him, a fact that caused a degree of despair. He smells good, she thought rather wildly as she breathed deeply and noticed the combination of leather, lemon, and pine. She puzzled over the differing scents. He must have gone riding after bathing, and then sat on some freshly polished furniture, she guessed, before dragging her attention back to his statement. Not wanting him to realize how distracting she found him, she was quick to dismiss his concern. Oh, I'm not so very fragile as that, my lord. Do not allow the doctor's concerns to trouble you overly. I think he is just unused to gunshot wounds, and thinks confinement is the only way to treat them. Actually, you would be surprised at just how many gunshot wounds a country doctor has to treat. There are any number of fools who accidentally shoot themselves or someone else, either with poor aim while hunting, or even while trying to clean their gun while in their cups. Elizabeth couldn't help laughing, despite the gravity of his words. His tone clearly conveyed his own dry humour on the subject. So you can see that the wise doctor actually has more than enough experience to tell you that you ought to remain abed. Perhaps, my lord, but I must warn you that I shan't listen to him if he stipulates any more days of bed rest. Very well. The Earl accepted her words with a nod and a smile, before sobering and launching into a description of his investigation thus far. Unfortunately, I am not making very rapid progress in my investigation. While several people have confirmed hearing the gunshot, and a couple of the farmers saw someone riding a brown horse right around the time you were shot, no one got a good look at him, so that has turned into a bit of a dead end. Now I have my steward and head groom going about the district, questioning everyone about their whereabouts on the day in question. Oh dear, that might cause some consternation amongst the neighbours, Elizabeth worried. I really do not give a fig for how uncomfortable they make anyone. My wife was shot, and I mean to find out who did it and why. Elizabeth thought about his words, gratified that he was taking the matter so seriously. I am relieved that you do not think it was somehow an accident. How could it possibly be construed an accident? Elizabeth shrugged. You mentioned that the doctor stitched up many a gunshot wound from accidental discharges. That was not meant to imply that your injury was anything other than a deliberate attack. Seeing her shiver, the Earl quickly apologized. I'm sorry, my dear. I do not mean to frighten you, but it is obvious that you were shot with at least some level of intent. From what we can tell, the gunman wasn't terribly far from you. The road was wide at that point, and it was a cold, clear day. There was no way you could have been mistaken for anything other than a woman driving a gig, and the shooter was on the road with you, so it is not as though the shot went wide from the woods. Elizabeth merely nodded. This was exactly what had happened, so there was no need to hash it out further. A brief silence fell between them, and Elizabeth was undecided if it was comfortable or not. She thought for a moment and then broke it. My lord, she was a little hesitant to broach this particular subject. Which lady in the vicinity was the highest on the social ladder before you took a wife? The Earl looked surprised by the question and somewhat uncertain how to answer. It would depend on how large an area you wish to include in your description of the vicinity, my dear lady. Lady Worth is a viscountess, and Lady Mead is a baroness. I do know that they vie for leadership of the social life in these parts. There are a couple other viscounties farther afield. So you are the only earl around, Elizabeth prodded, and no dukes anywhere to be found? Her husband laughed at her words, but scrunched his forehead in question. Why are you asking? She didn't immediately answer his question. Instead, asked another one of her own. I met Lady Mead the other day, but have not yet had the pleasure of meeting Lady Worth. What can you tell me about her? Lord Sinclair laughed rather helplessly. I don't really know what to tell you. She's about the same age as me, I think. Somewhere in her 30s, probably. They have several children. I think their oldest son is off at Eton. She is a trifle shrill, but she seems nice enough. Was she friendly with your first wife? Elizabeth was watching him closely for his reaction to her question. He looked uncomfortable, but that could have been reluctance to discuss his first wife with his second. Barbara wasn't terribly friendly with other ladies. She had a tendency to view life as a competition, and she considered herself the winner because she caught herself an earl. Such an attitude did not lend itself to forming close attachments with others. Elizabeth laughed at his marked understatement. She felt the blush inflame her cheeks. I'm so sorry, my lord. I do not mean any disrespect to your wife. It is just that your description was so droll. Do not trouble yourself, my dear. I did not take offence. I am glad you have retained your ability to laugh despite the trying circumstances you have found yourself in. He gave her a grin to demonstrate he meant his words. Now tell me, what has led you to this line of questions? Elizabeth turned her attention to the blanket she was reflexively folding and unfolding with her nervous fingers. Her eyes flickered to Pansy, who was still standing guard. Bolstering her courage, Elizabeth blurted out her concerns. "I was wondering if it might be possible that another lady in the area might be responsible for the death of your first wife and for the attack on me." Seeing his incredulous stare, she hastened to explain. "I know it sounds ridiculous, my lord, but no one has been able to come up with any other ideas. Is it possible that Lady Worth or Lady Mead felt that a countess in the neighbourhood would make them somehow less important in the neighbours' eyes?" "I can see what you're saying, my lady, and it is entirely possible that either or both of them laboured under such feelings. But I have a very hard time imagining that either of them would then take their feelings and put them into the action of actually ending another woman's life over their petty concerns. I have met Lady Mead, and at least with regard to her, I have to agree with you completely. She is a charming lady, who did not seem to bear any ill will toward anyone, despite the friendly rivalry she seemed to have going on with Lady Worth. But what about Lady Worth? Is it possible she takes these matters far more seriously? As a Viscountess, she would be the one with her nose most out of joint for having a Countess take up residence." The Earl regarded her steadily, taking her words seriously, much to Elizabeth's delight. She could once again feel the attractive draw of the handsome man before her. "I can see what you're saying, and I hate to speak ill of the dead, but in all reality of the three ladies in question, the only one that I can see being capable of action such as you suspect would be Barbara, and she is most definitely not the one who attacked you, so I do not think this is the right direction we need to take." She sighed. "I fear you are correct, my lord, but since it had occurred to me, I didn't want to leave any possibility unpursued. I really do fear for my future safety." Elizabeth tried not to dwell on it too heavily, but the fact remained that the Earl's first wife was dead and someone had attacked her. It did not bode well for her if they did not get to the bottom of it. "This is my fault, my lady. I never should have remarried. I should have known there was a possibility something like this would happen. Perhaps, as soon as you are well enough to travel, I should escort you to your parents' estate. I believe it is your association with me that puts you in danger." Elizabeth didn't bother trying to be polite on the subject. "You are no doubt correct, my lord, but I do not see how being cooped up together in a carriage will keep me safe. I fear that we would not make it to my father's estate. No, the best course of action is to figure this thing out, and then you can escort me to my parents for a visit." She concluded this with a smile, hoping not to antagonize the man. It must have worked, because he returned her smile with one of his own that was tinged with gratitude. Elizabeth was more and more convinced that he really was innocent of the attack on her. But when her eyes flickered once more to Pansy, she caught her swift shake of the head. With a sigh, she realized it was time to dismiss the Earl. "Thank you for coming to visit with me, my lord. It has certainly helped to pass this dull afternoon. But now I fear it is time for me to take another nap. For all that I disagree with the doctor, he was certainly correct in his assessment that I would be tired for several days." Elizabeth was relieved when the Earl accepted her words with good grace. She wasn't even stretching the truth. She could feel her eyelids getting heavier and heavier as each moment passed. Elizabeth watched curiously, but with a level of detachment caused by her exhaustion, as the Earl stood from her bed, taking great care not to jostle her, then remained there gazing at her. She snuggled down under her covers, vaguely puzzled over the way he continued to stare at her. It almost looked as though he cared for her. Elizabeth felt hope well in her heart at the thought, but resolved to dwell on it at a later time, when she wasn't on the verge of losing consciousness. After one more scorching glance, the Earl bent down, dropped a chaste kiss on her forehead, and strode from the room with a nod to the maid. Pansy locked the door behind him, making Elizabeth smile as she drifted off to sleep. Elizabeth awoke only long enough to have another light meal. In between spoonfuls of the warm soup, she and Pansy discussed all that they knew about the previous Countess's death. Unfortunately, it wasn't much, and Elizabeth became even more determined to leave her bedchamber the next day. She could find out nothing more while confined to bed. She was relieved to receive the doctor's visit first thing the next morning. As he examined her, Elizabeth informed him that he had best declare her well. It doesn't really matter to me what your verdict is, Doctor. I have every intention of getting up and dressed as soon as you leave, whether you give me the go-ahead or not. I cannot bear another moment longer in this room." The doctor laughed easily at her words. "Very well, my lady. You know what your body is telling you. I beg of you to listen to it. Do not strain your injury. Do your best to keep your arms still, and rest when you are tired. You will not have your usual strength for a couple more days." He smiled over the delighted chuckle of glee his patient couldn't hold back, but he still fixed her with a pointed stare. "Don't make me regret it, my lady. Be sure not to overdo on your first day." "I promise to be careful," she replied, as seriously as she could manage with how happy she was to be leaving her room.